This is the Dog Days podcast from UGAsports.com, the show where we chat with former Georgia Bulldogs about their eras in Athens. I'm your host, Dayne Young. You can scroll back in your feed to hear from Keith Marshall, Terrence Edwards, Chris Burnett, Aaron Davis, and on this episode we have Arthur Lynch, the former tight end for Georgia from 2009 to 2013. He's got a lot of great stories to share, including what he's doing now with the Army, but then also the 2012 SEC Championship game, and just his great relationship with one of the Florida assistant coaches now. You probably know who I'm talking about. Here he is, Arthur Lynch. Arthur Lynch joining us here on the Dog Days podcast. Arthur, I think a lot of Georgia fans have seen from your Twitter that you are doing some things with the Army now, and you were telling me you're in Columbus, Georgia. So tell me where you're at, what you're doing, because you're the first podcast guest that I've had that has said, hey, hold on, I've got to do something for the sergeant really fast.
Yeah, definitely. So right now I'm just working in the S shop of 211th Infantry here on Fort Benning. So I'm still in school mode. So what that means is I started out in basic training in September. I graduated from that in November, and then I moved over to officer candidate school and was commissioned in March. And since then I've been waiting to class up for IBULLOC, which is Infantry Basic Officer Leaders Course. Once I finish that, I will then move on to Ranger School, and then after that, I will go to Airborne School because my follow-on orders are in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and that is with the 82nd Airborne. So I will be in Fort Benning for the foreseeable future, most likely for another 8 to 9 months. But once that's complete, I'll move on over to Fort Bragg and kind of start my Army career.
Is the Army something that you had in the back of your head as something you might be interested in? Because I know your dream was football, right? It was the NFL.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for me, in particular, growing up, football was always the number one priority, or not necessarily priority, but it was always the number one thing on my mind. It was a childhood dream, and a lot of the decisions I made early on in life, or at least in my athletic life, were based around the idea of one day playing in the NFL. Obviously, a big decision was going to the University of Georgia because of its pedigree, not only for the NFL, but just tight end in particular. So obviously when I went to UGA and started my career there, the end goal was not, get my degree and, set myself up for the rest of my life, but really it was to put myself in a position to play in the NFL. I was fortunate enough to do that, but unfortunately, due to a number of circumstances really focused around my back and the back injuries that I had, it was cut short. With that being said, towards the end of my college career and really my first year in the NFL, I started thinking about what I might want to do outside of football. And I kind of told myself, after being kind of motivated and inspired by a few outside sources or outside factors from people that I heard who were either serving or had served, who kind of inspired me to do the same, I told myself that if my body was able to handle it and I was young enough in my from an age perspective to that, it's something that I would at least give it a shot and see if I could get accepted into the programs and clear myself medically. It took a little bit longer after I was released from the Atlanta Falcons in September of 2016. I walked into a recruiter's office for the Marines and started my application process for an OCS. After about 3 denied medical waivers, I moved over from a Marine office to an Army office, recruiter's office, and it really ended up being an 18-month to 20-month process of trying to get cleared medically. And once I was, it all happened pretty quickly. It was really this time last year I stood in front of the officers board in Portland, Maine, and at a base there, or Portsmouth, Maine, excuse me, and I was accepted, and then I shipped out September.
What is more difficult, basic training or mat drills?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably physically is mat drills, but I'd say mentally is basic training, just because it's so hard to keep your mind stimulated over the course of 10 weeks because you don't get books, you don't get phone calls, you don't really get anything except handwritten letters and, a bunch of spit in your face from drill sergeants. So I'd say mentally it's basic training was a little bit more mind-numbing and tedious, but mat drills are pretty tough, I'm not going to lie.
I want to go back to your recruitment a little bit because I think recruiting's a bit more national even now than when you were recruited. But how unique or how rare was it for someone like you from the Northeast to have Georgia on your mind?
I think at that point in time, it was, I don't want to say unique, but it definitely wasn't. It wasn't every year that Massachusetts was putting kids in the SEC. My year in particular, we had a few kids that went out of state to play football. A couple kids went to Maryland, one kid went to Iowa, two kids went to UNC. I was the only SEC kid, and I think it was pretty rare. I was fortunate enough to get recruited by a lot of schools early on, and I think when the SEC started calling, which was like Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee came first. I think Georgia kind of saw that I was, a big tight end that kind of fit the mold of what their offense was, and they probably saw that other schools were recruiting me. So that's when they sent the coach up to look at me in person, and that was John Lilly. And then once he kind of saw me in person and realized that, I guess it wasn't my measurements checked out, 6'5", 250, whatever it was. That's when they ultimately offered me a scholarship. But once they offered, it wasn't too out of the ordinary in terms of the process that I dealt with Georgia as opposed to any other school. But I do think the fact that a lot of schools came in early that normally didn't come into Dartmouth High School or Massachusetts in particular was a unique thing, not only for me, but really for my whole high school to kind of watch it happen. And for other kids that I played with who also had an opportunity to play in college after, it was kind of cool to have coaches in and talk to us, not just me, but other players who were pretty good on my team. They were probably better high school players than I was. But I think once I got that first initial interest from Georgia, it was pretty, standard operating procedure, as we say in the Army, for my recruitment.
Do you have any funny or crazy recruiting stories? Maybe something that a coach pitched to you, or something that, even if it wasn't you, something that you heard about happened in recruiting?
Well, obviously, there's the infamous story with Orson Charles, checking the national championship trophy with his butt, and it fell over against Florida, which always I thought was funny. But I do know that my mom walked out at Coach Meyer's office when we visited Florida first, which was the day before we visited Georgia, and she just didn't really like the vibe of University of Florida. She didn't really like the vibe of Urban Meyer for whatever reason. In terms of just, I don't think it was. She thought he was a bad guy or anything like that. I think she just kind of saw that, it wasn't as an authentic place as some of the other schools, and she just has a very good judge of character and can understand different scenarios pretty fluidly. And I think she just kind of had enough, and she was like, "All right, it's time to go." And I looked at Coach Meyer and I was like, "Well, I got to go. That's my ride." And me and her just kind of left with my grandfather. And then the next day we were in Athens, Georgia, and I couldn't even describe to you the different type of feeling that my mom got from what we had just experienced at the University of Florida to what she was experiencing at University of Georgia with both Coach Lilly and Coach Mark Richt. And I think that was a big sell for her to allow her only son and youngest child to go 1,000 miles away from school, from where I grew up, where we grew up, that is, in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. And I think that was a real selling point for her, that she could trust these two individuals, those two individuals, again, being Coach John Lilly and Mark Richt, with her only son. And I think that was a big selling point for her. And to compare and contrast my experience at Florida the day before to my experience at Georgia the next day is, words don't really do it justice.
John Lilly was a really good recruiter, and I know he's still in the game a little bit, but he had a lot of you guys in his era, and I know that when the coaching change happened, that was one of the guys that a lot of people hated to see go.
Yeah, I think I can't say enough good things about Coach Lilly, not only as a coach, but as a person. He's someone that I still consider myself very close to. He's someone that I have leaned on and continue to lean on for kind of guidance and just coaching from a life perspective. He's a stand-up guy. He's a family man. He's a great husband and father to his kids. And, to put things in perspective for how much I value his opinion and lean on him for advice and help in life, he's a guy that wrote one of my letters of recommendation to get into the Army, to get into the OCS. So I think that just tells you the type of person that Coach Lilly is, and I think you would find a similar reaction and explanation from fellow tight ends and special teamers who were directly under Coach Lilly, because he obviously had the responsibility of special teams and tight end. And, not only, again, he was such a great coach, X's and O's, knew how to get the best out of his players. He knew how to adapt his coaching style for different types of players, whether it be between me and Orson, or Aaron White and Orson, or Bruce Figgins and Trip Chandler, whatever it was. He was able to adapt his coaching style that best fit his players. And I think that's a huge, huge advantage as a coach, not only in the college ranks, but really anywhere in football, because you think about as you kind of dilute the sample of players as you get higher in the ranks of football, you get so many different types of personalities. Yeah, we're all football players, but each person learns a different way, and the more complex the offensive system is, the harder it is to teach and the harder it is to learn and comprehend. And John Lilly did an unbelievable job at breaking it down into a specific way that each one of us knew and could understand. And because of that is why I think we had a ton of success under his watch from the tight end position.
And that's especially important at tight end when you have the variety of responsibilities on each kind of play. When you moved to the South, did you have any culture shock?
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, Coach Mike Bobo was my biggest culture shock, and probably Ben Jones. I mean, I couldn't even understand what they were saying, and that's kind of a running joke that, Coach Bobo was yelling at me like every other day freshman year, because I was in some packages as a true freshman. And I honest to God, I had no idea what he was saying. And so I was kind of getting frustrated with him, and he was getting frustrated with me. And Coach Lilly was like, "What's the matter? Like, why aren't you doing what he's saying?" I was like, "Coach, I have no idea what the hell he's saying." And so we laugh about it now. But, yeah, I definitely think there was a number of different culture shocks. I mean, especially looking back on it now, how different the South is from where I came from. And it's not for better or for worse. It's just different. How people live their daily lives, what's important to some people and what's not as important to others, I think is a huge thing. And it's not universal between the North and the South, or West Coast and East Coast, but I do think there's a significant difference. And I may have been resisting it at first and not fully submerging myself in the Southern culture, which is probably why I didn't fit in completely right away. But I remember coming back from Christmas break after the end of the Texas A&M bowl game in 2009. I think it was Independence Bowl or Liberty Bowl, or one of the two. And just I was like, I got to give it another shot, and I got to really just kind of sink my teeth in and enjoy my time as a college student athlete. And only when I did that is when I truly realized what a special place UGA was, what the community was, and kind of, what a blessing it was for me to be there, even though I was kind of resisting it a little bit and I was a little bit homesick. But again, when you talk about where you come from and as an 18-year-old kid, and then you go to college in a completely different part of the country, which seemed like a wholly different part of the world, it change isn't necessarily easy to adapt to. And I think for me in particular, once I adapted to it and I realized, I was like, wow, this is a really special place. That's when I really started getting the most out of the University of Georgia. And I think the University of Georgia got the most out of me because of it.
How would you compare the fanaticism of the SEC UGA to what you grew up around? I mean, is it the Patriots with Tom Brady? I mean, is it the closest thing? I know sports is it.
I mean, I think you're completely. I mean, it's such an accurate comparison. Obviously, there's no college sports team that's going to get the same level of commitment and passion from a local, I guess, constituency in New England. But when you talk about the Patriots, you talk about the Red Sox or the Celtics, really the Patriots, especially because of the dominance over the past 10 years, it's very similar. I mean, you got the tailgates, you got people getting tattoos of whatever, the Patriot head or in the Georgia G. And I think in that regard, it's very similar. But again, it's just crazy to think about when my friends who played football at Boston College or played football at a smaller school in New England and came visit me, they're like, wow, you guys are a professional team. And although we were taught to handle it as such, I never really thought of it like that until I went back to visit my friends at Boston College or visit my friends somewhere at a different school. And I realized it was such a different experience that they were having to what myself and my teammates were having. And one thing I will say is, although there's a ton of privileges that are gifted to us as student athletes at UGA, I do think the level of attention that is put on the university football team, the University of Georgia football team, I think you have to grow up a little bit faster. I think you have to accept a little bit more responsibility than other kids at our age because of the level of importance that is put on the sport and put on the team in particular.
Yeah, it's always tough for teenagers to hop in that, and especially now when you think about it, because players are being asked to do more even faster than even I think when your era came through, and even then freshmen are obviously contributing. We're not talking that many years, but it just seems like that scale just kind of goes faster now. Quick break to tell you about a special that we have going on UGAsports.com. You can sign up right now and save 50% on your first year. That's all the access to the inside scoop, the recruiting buzz, and then the most active community of UGA fans anywhere on the internet. It really is a family of all of us involved in it. So it's promo code 50UGA. You can sign up. Hit me up on Twitter if you need help with that. My Twitter is at Dayne Young, DayneYoung. Once again, save 50% on a membership to UGAsports.com. Promo code 50UGA. I do want to go into some of the game action and see if there's any backstories to these. So you'd mentioned the end of your first year. The second year, you've got 2010. We've got the 6-7 loss to UCF at the Liberty Bowl, and I have to imagine that's a pretty turbulent time because you've got this faith in this coaching staff, and that was really the first, I would say, moment that there was some doubt about the future of the program. As a player, how did that affect you?
So that's a great question. I was actually redshirted in 2010, and so I kind of I felt a little bit isolated from the team and distant from the team because as a redshirt, that just naturally happens because you don't spend as much time with the team. You practice, you do that stuff, but when the team leaves for the road on Friday, you kind of stand behind. And it's kind of cool because I was able to harbor some relationships with players, with other student athletes and people that weren't necessarily athletes at UGA, which was great. But I didn't realize kind of how touchy the players and coaches were until really the end of the year. We had our end of the year meeting, and there was rumors that Coach Rick was maybe going to Miami, and then we already had a new defensive coordinator, and we were just trying to figure out what was next. And that's when Coach Rick, kind of told the team that he was staying at Georgia, and he had a mission not only to win football games but to raise us as men. And I shared that story on Instagram when he officially retired this past winter. And I definitely think for me, it was a little bit worrisome because I was coming off the red shirt. I was just trying to redefine myself as a player and try to find somewhere on the team that I fit to contribute to. But I think there was so much just doubt surrounding not only Coach Rick, whether he's going to stay or he's go, but really what's the direction of the team? I think that same year, AJ got suspended for 4 games, and he was as good as gone. Justin Houston was leaving. I think Brandon Boykin was considering it. And it was just tough because at any point in time, especially at University of Georgia, the expectations are always high, just like they are at Alabama, just like they are at LSU, and they are at Florida. And if you don't meet those expectations, if you go 10-3, people are pissed off. But you go 6-7, the rumblings start happening. And I think that was the first time that Kirby Smart's name is mentioned. When Coach Rick was considering about leaving or got another offer. And I think people were very, very concerned about what's going to happen to the core guys that are here. But ultimately, we turned it around. We went to the SEC Championship game the next year. There wasn't any specific story that I could say that would really show the instability that was going on, not necessarily throughout the program, but just throughout the team. But I do think once Coach Rick made that kind of speech to us about how much he cared about his mission for his players, which was the first meeting that we had back in January of 2011 now, I think we all kind of had to refocus. And once we kind of refocused, we realized that there was an opportunity for us to do some pretty awesome things with the core group that came back. And ultimately we did some pretty good things, not where we wanted to go, but we definitely turned it around.
Yeah, and 2011 was that turnaround year. It did not start that way, though.
No, it did not.
And a piece of that was the Power Rangers uniforms that Chris Burnett said that you guys were incredibly excited to get. But then when you were in the Georgia Dome, at least from his perspective, it was a little less appealing at that point. What do you remember about those jerseys?
So like I saw what Chris said. Like they 100% when they came out, and like I think it was Boykin and Ben Jones. Everyone was fired up. They're like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." Well, and we always wanted like pro combat jerseys. The only other alteration we had on jerseys was the Florida freshman year with the black pants and black helmet.
Oh man,
and which were the black pants were dope. But we obviously got our asses handed to us, so it wasn't that dope. But I think like ultimately. We were pretty fired up, but then once we like realized like, well, okay, these are pro combat, we'll get like some sick cleats and gloves, but like these aren't that like the uniforms aren't that tight. And I don't, the game was much closer than what people thought or what it looked like, but I do think that the uniforms could have not been the focus had we just won the game, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, we lost that game. Then we come back into barn burner in versus South Carolina at home. We really should have won that game. I think we gave up like 3 touchdowns that weren't on offense. It was like a pick six, like a fumble recovery, and maybe like a block punt or something. I think it was 2. So I think we kind of gave that game away, and that's when the rumblings started happening again. Everyone was like, "All right, we have a good decision to make. Are we going to turn this thing around? Are we going to reel off 10 in a row, or are we just kind of get in a fetal position and our coach is going to get fired and then kids are going to transfer and leave the draft?" And I think that's ultimately we kind of did a man in the mirror type moment and we turned it around, and because of that, we had something to show for it. But definitely that the first 2, and I mean that game in the Dome is kind of a blur now, but I just think that once we settled down, we ended up having a really good or a very solid season, and a big chunk of that was because the offense started coming together and being pretty dynamic when the running backs were healthy and available, and then obviously the defense ended up having a stellar year.
So you reel off the 10 straight, you get to Atlanta back in the Dome, and Chris was saying that the LSU game, the SEC title game, was one of the more physical games that he had ever played in, that it was just a dogfight out there, and that by the second half, LSU, that's where kind of that momentum came in. What do you remember about that SEC championship?
I think that a very good summary on that entire season was we were always really good on 2 or 3 phases of the game. You know what I mean? There was very few times that year where we were like all 3 phases we were like stellar, and that's probably why we didn't end up winning the NFC Championship game, is because we were really good on 2 sides of the ball in the first half, and then in the third half, in the second half, we just kind of like completely let ourselves go on special teams. And when we lost momentum on special teams, we started making mistakes on offense and defense. And I think that's ultimately when we realized, like, okay, maybe we're not there yet. We're very close to being a championship football team. But, this is the first time we've been here for a while where it's not that we lack the talent of an LSU or an Alabama, but we just aren't quite there yet. And then I think the next year we started proving that, hey, we're a championship level football team, and ultimately 2012 SEC championship game. I mean, we don't have to go into too many details about that because it seems like it's been deja vu every other year since.
Well, I mean, I kind of do want to go into some of the details because that final drive that everyone remembers, you were such an integral part of that. So if you're cool with it, what I'd like to do is just read the play, and if you have any mindset or anything that you remember, just kind of take me back to where you were. It all happened so fast, I know, but it all began, there's not much time left on the clock. It was a 9-yard gain, Murray, to you.
Yeah, definitely. So actually a play I remember even before that, it was a goal line situation. I think it was like on 3rd and short or 4th and short. And had we gotten that, had we turned that over, had we converted that 4th or 3rd down, whatever it was, we most likely would have been able to run out the clock and win the game. And I ended up not getting a block as strong as a block I would have liked. And we necessarily didn't get the first down. But again, ultimately we had a chance to win it at the end. And the thing I remember most clearly is just the fact that we had them on the ropes, and we were completing some passes here. I think we ran a draw at one point. I caught a couple balls, but I think the thing that really was sticking out is like we had Alabama on the ropes, and they didn't really know how to adapt to us. because we were attacking, and they really hadn't stopped us all game. And everyone always talks about should we have called timeout or should we have spiked or whatever. And I think, from my understanding, the way I see it, the way I perceive those final seconds, is the reason we did not is because why give one of the greatest coaches of all time, football coaches of all time, and Nick Saban, an opportunity to sub in his defense and catch a break and really put himself in a position to put the defense out there that he knows will win him the football game. And we didn't spike it. We had a very good play called. Malcolm Mitchell for a fade in the outside quarter of the end zone. We didn't pick up the block. Mosley wasn't even really supposed to be coming. He was supposed to be dropping in coverage, but he came and we didn't pick up the block, and he tipped it and calmly reacted, as any receiver should react. But I know for me, leading up to that play, I mean, when I had the ball, it was always about get out of bounds or get down and hurry up. So, looking back on it now, I wish I maybe would have ran my angle a little bit different on Vinny Sinceri, because I think I would have been able to break away from him. But at the end of the day, grass is always green on the other side, and it's very hard to kind of go back in time and try to manipulate what happened. But I think the big thing about that is we had Alabama on the ropes, and they caught a lucky break, and because of that, they ended up whipping Notre Dame's ass in the national championship game.
Yeah, so you had a 9-yard gain, you had a 15-yard gain, and a 26-yard gain. I think that last one maybe when you're talking. Once you have that final gain, you guys are rushing up to the line of scrimmage. One, I don't think Aaron Murray gets enough credit for really orchestrating that drive. But two, just did it seem like that whole drive is going in slow motion? I know when the clock starts ticking and there's nothing you can do about that at the end, it has to feel that way. But just what did it feel like to be on the field in that moment, knowing that, hey, if we can figure this out, we've got Notre Dame on the other side of this?
So I don't think you ever think about what's coming out on the other side. You just think about the task at hand and being in the moment. And I know for me in particular, it was just like we practice those situations every day, every single day, like no matter what, throughout the season. So it really just came naturally to me, and I think to the rest of the offense, which is why we put ourselves in a position to win the game at the end of it. Unfortunately, we didn't come out on top to win the game, but I do think, like, at no point do we think about like, oh, we have Notre Dame on the other side, or if we make this play, we win the national championship. I think it's just one of those things that you're hardwired as an athlete and as a football player to make, okay, it is, we have a minute and 15 seconds left. We have 7 yards to go. Here are the plays. Hurry up, 2-minute offense, get to the line. Aaron's going to call the play. He's going to put us in the formation. We're going to go. And that's what we did. And we did it very well. Unfortunately, we didn't do it to the best of our ability in the last play of the game. And because of that, we are having this conversation now. But yeah, I definitely don't think as an athlete you ever want to put yourself in a position like, what if we get this play, this is what's going to happen. You don't want to do hypotheticals, especially in the moment. And I don't think well-coached and well-trained teams do play hypotheticals in the moment because they're too busy focused on the task at hand and trying to, complete the mission, which is win the football game.
The margins are so thin, man. It's a crazy game when it can be decided by that little.
Absolutely. Game benches.
2013 was a fun year, so that's your final year in Athens. The LSU game, I've been told, is one of the loudest that Sanford Stadium has ever been. For the players, did you kind of feel the energy of that game? Because I know, especially for your recruiting class, that was extra special because Zach Mettenberger's on the other side, and a lot of you guys came to Athens with him.
Yes, I mean, I was at Zach's wedding like 2-3 weeks ago. So, I mean, and ironically, I was at Aaron's a month and a half ago. So it was definitely a huge game emotionally for all of us, but especially for Zach and Aaron, because they were roommates at one point. They had this like heated kind of rivalry in the very beginning, and I thought it was a really cool. It was a perfect culmination of. It was the perfect outcome and kind of culmination of the relationship between those two, and really the best possible scenario that I could have dreamt, because two of my close friends had like games of the century, and neither of them were kind of talked negatively about after that game because they played so well, and obviously my team won. So I think, and it was such an electric atmosphere. It was a top 10 matchup. I don't think the stadium has ever been as loud as it had been when Murray got like sacked or batted down, or not Murray, Mettenberger at the end of the game. The only other time I think it was that loud was when when Rambo had his pick six against Auburn in 2011. Mm-hmm. So I think from that aspect, and in the first half of the season there was so much excitement. There were so many big games. There were so many awesome big wins that we had, that it made my senior year great. But obviously it was very bittersweet because in the second half of the year we had so many injuries, and it was just I don't say anticlimactic. I don't have any regret about college, but it sucked to see some of my close friends and close teammates go down with injuries that we couldn't even control. Because there is a big what if, I think, with that team, because we had a very, 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 very good offense. Probably the best offense that would have ever came through Georgia had we stayed healthy.
Well, and I think that you guys definitely proved that, obviously with the running back depth, but even with the receivers and Aaron Murray's experience, you guys at tight end. Even the battered version of the team was seconds away from beating Auburn, who eventually made it to the national championship. That prayer at Jordan-Hare, that's got to be one of the more just like gut punches that you took, right?
Yeah, there's probably only one team I truly hate, and that's Auburn. Florida I dislike, but I'm kind of like silently supporting them right now because my man Christian Robinson's there. So, everyone's going to hate me for saying that, but I'm loyal to my friends. So as long as he's there, I gotta pull for him, except to the world's largest cocktail party, of course. But I think that game, if you look at the whole season of 2013, it's that game was like a perfect kind of like encapsulation, right? It encapsulated that season. It was like exciting. It was a rivalry game. It was to the end, nail biter, like ESPN instant classic. But at the same time, it's like there's an outside force that didn't want us to win, right? It's very hard for me to explain, but I remember looking at that when me and Murray were on the sideline and watched that thing, just the ball tip, and it just of course landed in this guy's hands, and he was running away from it, and he just looked up and it happened to be there. Me and Murray were like, is that not just like the perfect depressing way of how our season's gone? It's like every single time we've been in a position to win a big game, like we either lost one of our like key players or a fumble didn't go our way, and not to complain and make excuses, but it was an exciting game. It's one I'll never forget. But it was gut wrenching. Like after that one, I was like severely depressed.
Well, and it didn't affect you, but at least it happened worse to Alabama 2 weeks later in that same stadium. There was just some funky mojo with Auburn that year.
Yeah, you got to give them credit. I mean, where credit is due. I mean, when they found a way to win the ball game, so that's one that we could say against them that year. But that was a very tough way to lose a football game.
Taking a quick break to say thank you for supporting the Dog Days podcast. By you listening, rating, subscribing, reviewing, all the things you're doing to support the Dog Days podcast, we're reaching a listener base that's a couple of thousand each episode. So that's each week that we're reaching a great many number of Georgia and SEC football fans. And that also means that this space is available for sponsorship. If that's something that you're interested in, to get your company's name out there to our fan base at UGAsports.com, email Roddy at UGAsports.com. That's RADI at UGAsports.com, and let him know that you want to sponsor the Dog Days podcast with Dayne. I got some quick hitters for you here, just some unique stories or little small things. I'll start with the Christian Robinson. I know he's your friend, but you guys have to pick on him for wearing the blue and orange now, right? Because he was Mr. Athens.
He still is Mr. Athens to a certain. I can't go into too many details, but he's still got Athens blood in him. I think obviously to give him grief, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't have Gators gear in my closet. I obviously got some Georgia gear in my closet as well, but Christian is one of those friends that they don't come around often, and you cherish the friendship you got with them. So yes, I can give him some grief, and obviously I pulled for my Bulldogs, but that kid has grinded, his rear end off since leaving college when he decided to be a college football coach. His career ended and he switched over to coaching. And as you can see, it's paying off tenfold because of the way he works, because of the type of person he is, because of that charisma and sparkle he's got, which few coaches have. But he has it, and Coach Lilly actually has it too, and so he's able to go into homes and convince parents that, hey, like, you can trust me with your son, not because I got a smile on my face and I can BS you, but because I genuinely care about his well-being, not only as an athlete but as a student. And you pair that with his ability to understand the game of football. Coach Christian Robinson is going to make a noise throughout the football world for years to come. And it's fun to give him grief now for wearing the gator on his hat or helmet, whatever you want to call it. But the fact of the matter is, he's been away from Georgia for a couple of years, so I've been able to give him grief wherever he's been at. And I think eventually one day he'll be in a neutral territory, or he'll be back home, and we'll be able to just cheer for him without any asterisk above his name.
Do you think he'll be an SEC head coach one day?
Absolutely.
You said that really fast, yeah.
Yeah, no question. If not that, in the NFL.
Who delivered the hardest hit that you ever took?
Oh, number 3, Morrison, Florida, my senior year. He hit me on my side of my kidney and lacerated my kidney, and I started peeing blood at halftime. That's a true story. It was miserable. He just absolutely rocked me. I caught a pass. We did like a little fake power run on like a 3rd and short, and ended up catching it on the opposite side of the field, ran down, and like the ball was up, and I wasn't protecting my rib cage, and he should have just stripped it because I would have fumbled, but instead he went right for my like exposed ribs and hit me right in the side, and it felt like my lung collapsed. I get up and kind of run to the sideline, and then at halftime I went to the bathroom, and there was just, it was red.
Oh, man. That's a story I've never heard, and that's definitely probably the worst injury that someone has told me on here. So,
that was awful.
What's the hardest hit that you delivered?
Hardest hit? So I was never in a ton of positions to deliver big blows, but when I was punt protector, personal protector in 2012 against Buffalo, I clotheslined a guy, like basically by accident. I was just trying to run him out of bounds, and he essentially ran into me. And it was a clothesline against Buffalo, and it looked really sick, and it looked like I did it intentionally. But, like, confession, it was not intentional, and it looked way cooler than what it actually was. He basically just ran into me. But that was probably the hardest I've ever hit somebody in college.
Who's the defender that you hated going up against most, whether it be someone in pass coverage or whether it be to try to block them?
Defender, opposite team, right? Not same team.
Either way, if you want to give me a Georgia guy in practice and then maybe an opponent.
Probably Darryl Gamble or Darius Dewberry are two guys that are flashback names, but I was so young, I didn't know how to play football really yet, and they would just beat the out of me. Leonard Floyd was very tough, but probably I would say Sharif Floyd from Florida, who was a first-round pick to the Vikings. They were low on DNs that year, and so he actually moved from D tackle to DN, and I had to block him in 2012, and it was one of my worst games ever because he was just such a load. I mean, so quick, so fast, so strong, and I was just like, God, this is going to look bad on film. But he was probably the toughest one to go against. I went against him a couple of years.
Man, for someone that had such bad memories against Florida, both physically but then also with that, I'm kind of surprised that Auburn is the team that you hated the most.
Yeah, well, I had some good. My last 3 games against Florida, we won. So it's like, you know what I mean? If you win, you don't really care. You forget about the bad memories.
Yeah. And now you're in Columbus, too, so you have to deal with Auburn people all around.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst.
Do you have a funny practice story, something that somebody did in practice that still makes you and your buddies laugh?
Funny practice story? God, there's a couple. Funny practice story.
See, one just came to your mind, and you decided not to tell it to me. I can hear that.
No. There is a couple, but this isn't really a story. But Coach Bobo, if a backup wide receiver or running back or someone if they were hurt or something, or they just weren't really, they were kind of being lazy that day, or coach thought they were slacking, he would just yell at the top of the lungs that they're stealing from the university and that they're wasting a scholarship. And I always thought that was hilarious because in his southern accent, he'd be like, "Y'all stealing, man. Y'all stealing." That's not really a story. That's just like a little Bobo chime in that I used to love. But I can't think of there's a hilarious stories that happen in the locker room, but like I just don't think that would be appropriate for a podcast.
Is there anything with Aaron Murray that still makes you laugh?
Yeah, his goofiness. Like everyone thinks that Aaron is like this like clean cut, super professional, super squared away, and he is. But he's just like the goofiest person in the world. I mean, I was at the wedding with him. He thinks he can dance. He thinks he can dress, but it's his wife. His wife has a full-time job just keeping him somewhat squared away because he's as goofy as they come. But he's also one of the most genuine, hardworking, nice guys you'll meet, which is why I consider him a close friend, and I still stay close to him to this day.
As we record this, SEC Media Days is happening. You were once a Georgia representative for SEC Media Days. How much of a gauntlet is that just to talk about the same things all day?
It's a gauntlet, but it's so cool. I mean, you really feel like you're a celebrity for a day. You take a private plane to Hoover, or we did. You get off, you're escorted everywhere. ESPN's around you. They have the sign if you're there. So it's a gauntlet, but you're kind of prepped going into it, and you're chosen because, they know you won't screw up too bad. So in reality, I loved every second of it. I thought it was a blast.
Where was the most difficult place to play?
I only played at South Carolina one time, and it was the top 5 matchup college game day, second game of the year in 2012 when we got our ass beat. And that game was the loudest stadium I probably had ever been to besides Sanford Stadium and LSU game, because they were just ready to go. It was a night game. Clowney was fired up, had a hell of a game. Sandstorm started playing. They were waving the white towels, and I was like, oh, I looked at Murray. I was like, boy, this might be a long game if this crowd's going to be like this all night. And they were. They definitely they lubricated themselves with alcoholic beverages that day, I'm pretty sure.
What's the most impressive play that you saw in practice from a teammate?
God, there was a lot. Probably A.J. Green was doing one-on-ones with Brandon Boykin, and Brandon Boykin was kind of giving A.J. some lip that day. And by lip, I mean calling him out. I think he was feeling himself, whatever it was.
That's never smart.
No, it was not. And like AJ goes, fine, get on the line, and just got on the line. And I think it was like a simple like screen pass or something. And AJ just like snagged it with one hand, and then immediately stuck out his arm with like a Heisman and just bullied Brandon Boykin. I mean, I'm talking about like it was like a Mike Tyson jab to the face. And Boykin just goes down on his back, and AJ just looks at him, slams the ball, and says, "Never again, never again." I was like, "Damn, that's why that dude's going top 5."
Yeah, and that's why he's still doing that every Sunday now.
He's up there as one of the best I've ever seen.
What was your go-to pregame song?
Probably Renegade, Eminem, and Jay-Z. I still use it when I'm running.
I saw you giving love to Lil Wayne the other day on Twitter, so I thought it might be some Wayne, but
no. So Fly In, Lil Wayne is really good. Going In on Lil Wayne is really good. I came across my old iTunes playlist, and it was like all Lil Wayne, and I was like, damn, this dude was the man back in the day. I think he's probably had a little bit too much scissor, but that dude he had some fire albums and mixtapes for like a solid 8 years.
We got to wrap this up here in a second, but I do want to give you a chance to put your analyst hat on for the current Bulldogs. I don't know how much you got to watch last season when you were in Columbus, going through some of the basic training and things you were doing, but it's a really young tight end core other than Charlie Warner in Athens now. What do you see from the tight ends or Georgia as a whole that you like or don't like?
I think I love their offensive line, and it all starts up front. Their offensive line is mammoth. They have legitimate NFL offensive line talent across the board. Obviously, they have experience at the quarterback position, so that right there puts you in a position to win ball games. Tight ends specifically, Charlie is a caged animal that needs to be let out. They need to throw the ball to him, and they need to throw the ball to the other guys in that room, because Georgia's offensive success has always been built around throwing the football to the tight end in some way, shape, or form, and I don't think they've done it enough in the recent years. But Charlie is a guy, he's about my size, maybe a little bit taller, but he can run. And he can run, he's agile, and he's very, very athletic. And I think they need to really utilize him as a weapon down the middle of the field. Obviously, they've been able to recruit the position of the running back very, very well over the course of the years because of who we've had. And you kind of, those three areas, right? You have the offensive backfield, you have the tight end, and you have the offensive line. If you're able to do that, or use those kind of three components together, no matter who you have on the outside, you're going to be able to open up things down down the sideline, throwing the ball deep in a play action pass setting. So I really think the offense could be something special. According to a number of different people I've spoken to close to the program, they say the defense is going to be great. So, I hate to make predictions about where this team's going to go, but I really do think that if they're able to set the tempo early up front with the offensive line and use the tight end like they should be able to, they can have a very, very, very good season.
When you're replacing tight end depth or wide receiver depth like Georgia is, what is that atmosphere like in a fall camp coming into it? Because Charlie's, I would say he's proven to this point. Like you said, he can be unleashed a little bit more, but the guys behind him, John Fitzpatrick or maybe some of the others that are even a little bit younger, they're stepping up to the plate. But then obviously you've got 3 wide receivers that are also going, that went to the NFL along with Isaac Nada. What is that atmosphere like in terms of competition where you have all of these different guys that are unproven trying to earn that playing time?
Yeah, I think if anything, it's exciting, and the level of competition heightens the intensity that goes on a daily basis in the locker room and on the field. I know for me, I had to replace an All-American in Orson Charles, and me and Jay Rome really combated one to each other on a daily basis. But I was so hungry to be the starter that I knew that if this young hotshot kid, who's probably more athletic than I am, if I don't bring it every single day, he's going to come and pass me, and that's how it is at UGA. I know. Patrick's a kid that's going to be really, really good. He comes from a great program at the Marist School, and he's got all the intangibles to be a great tight end. Warner's obviously a veteran who's going to be able to help mentor the young kids, and hopefully the young kids push him to be a better player. But really on the outside, UGA has always, always, always recruited very athletic, fast, long wide receivers. And I don't know any of them personally, so I can't speak to who they are as people, but I can speak to the type of people they've had there in the past, that if they're hungry for competition, their athletic ability will only be more amplified down the road. Because really that's what, when you have openings on the outside and at tight end in those skill positions, I mean, the level of competition just heightens, and the more fierce the competition is amongst peers, the better off your team's going to be, and the better off those positions will be filled.
Man, Arthur, there's never enough time to chat with you about as much as we could chat with you with. You're always such a good representative for Georgia, and you tell great stories, and I think our fans are going to really love this. So we appreciate you making time for us, and best wishes with what you're doing with your career, and we appreciate what you're doing there.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time. I love talking Georgia football. It's a little bit better than talking to my sergeant. So anytime that you want to talk, give me a heads up, and go Dogs.
Big thanks to Arthur Lynch for joining us here on the Dog Days podcast. When he was a player at Georgia, he was always one of the most common media requests, simply because he was passionate and honest and authentic, and that definitely has not changed. Really enjoyed chatting with him. I hope you did as well. Next time on Dog Days, we've got a guy who literally grew up around the program. You'll have to wait and see who that is. That's probably coming next week here on the Dog Days podcast. I'm Dayne Young.